Here at the 14th Brooklyn plaque on Culp's Hill, Lower Culp's Hill. There's the Geary monument there in the distance. He was the division commander in command of this portion of the line. And the Culp's Hill fighting is very confused and changed because of the shuffling around of Union troops that were pulled from this portion of the line to help cover other portions of the line. So the hill, this section of the hill, essentially all along here, you can sort of follow the trail of monuments up to that crest over there, changed hands over the course of July 2nd, and then again on July 3rd when the Union recaptured it. And there's Party Field over there, which is where I was earlier. But this plaque is kind of indicative of the shuffling nature of the Union troops on this position of the Union line, because the 14th Brooklyn, aka the 84th New York, is from the 1st Division of the 1st Corps. And the 1st Corps was shattered after the fighting on July 1st, and this notes here at the bottom of this that in the first day's battle, this regiment was heavily engaged with the 1st Corps at the railroad, which would be the railroad cut beyond the seminary, as indicated by a monument there. So they have their full monument there, but then a plaque over here saying, hey, when the shattered 1st Corps was moved over to the Union right in order to assist Pat Green in his defense of Culp's Hill, they ended up being engaged here as well. And so, and on the night of July 2nd, when the Confederates were moving to occupy these positions, the 14th Brooklyn ended up defending here and being engaged here. So just an interesting reminder about how shuffled everything is along this battlefield. So a sort of interesting monument here on Lower Culp's Hill, and about the extremity of Lower Culp's Hill. At this point, we are sloping up enough on the Park Drive here to be getting into Upper Culp's Hill, which was sort of the main strategically defensive position of the Union right. But this monument is to the 150th New York. You can see the Dutchess County Regiment, and it's one of the largest monuments on this portion of the battlefield. The New Yorkers seem to love their castle style monuments, but this was part of Lockwood's brigade, which was a brigade full of new regiments, one of the largest in the 12th Corps. And these guys, Gettysburg was their first action. You can see on their roster, and they've got substantial information on their roster, which is tough to read because it's up so high, but of their different companies and then their casualties and all that stuff. But here you can see their engagements listed, and probably hard to read. Try and zoom in on it. Gettysburg listed first there, and then immediately they're at Resaca, New Hope Church, the Siege of Atlanta, etc., the Carolinas campaign. So along with a lot of basically the rest of the 12th Corps, they were sent to the west after Gettysburg and took part in Atlanta and the March to the Sea and all that stuff. So interesting. And these guys had, dare I say, scant action on the Gettysburg battlefield, along with frankly, a lot of these regiments that have markers along here didn't exactly do a whole lot. Their casualties were pretty light, and they either just occupied breastworks that had already been reclaimed, or held a position that was not heavily engaged by the Confederates. And a lot of them on the right side of the road down that way, there are 6th Corps regiments, and the 6th Corps was largely in reserve at Gettysburg and saw little action. Most of the action they did see was around here. And they have their regiments have some substantial monuments themselves. Again, despite some fairly scant action, but this is what Gettysburg is. You were here, and you get to put a pretty big monument up, even if you just kind of sat around and defended against few attacks. 50th New York monument position up to the top of sort of Upper Culp's Hill, or just Culp's Hill. And you can get a sense here of how difficult this terrain is for troops to try and assault up it. Obviously there's a lot more ground cover here now than there would have been at the time. And so, you know, even with much less tree cover, as was the case historically, still very steep, rocky, difficult terrain. So you can imagine trying to assault up this against Union troops that are behind abattis or breastworks, and then furthermore trying to do it in the dark, not really feasible. So it would make sense to recognize that this was not really a tenable target for the Confederate troops to actually take. Something sort of rare here. This is still on the slopes of Culp's Hill here. A company marker, which you don't see too often, but the unit action was so small here on Culp's Hill because there were so few defenders for the Union at the time. And, you know, looking back behind up the slope there, you can see I can't tell what regimental marker that is, but then beyond, the trail continues beyond that up to the summit of the hill. You know, down here it was just companies skirmishing in the dark, and at one point on the night of July 1st there was pretty much just one regiment here holding off the better part of a Confederate corps. So kind of, again, give you an idea of just how difficult this terrain was to navigate. And not unexpectedly, from the 60th New York company marker down the trail there, we are here at the regimental marker for the 60th New York, one of the regiments guarding the slopes of Culp's Hill on July 2nd, 3rd. And you can see they were at some pretty big engagements, and with the rest of the 12th Corps moved on to the Atlanta campaign, although it looks like they were not part of Sherman's March to the Sea or the Carolinas campaign. So interesting to note the different services of all these different regiments. Here we are kind of a little more on the north slope of Culp's Hill, and you can see just how steep the drop-off is from the summit here. And I'm down a little ways from the summit. If you look back up in that direction, that's up to the 7th Indiana Monument up at the top of the hill. And the 7th Indiana was one of the regiments that was instrumental here the first night of keeping the Confederates from overrunning this position. They had been moved over at the end of the first day. They were part of the 1st Corps, which was destroyed largely on the first day's fighting. And they were sent over here to the quote-unquote quiet part of the line, since they were, you know, part of the combat ineffective brigade. And they basically, the noise that they made convinced the Confederates that were probing this position in the dark on the night of July 1st that there were a lot more Federal troops up here than what there were. And so, and that was basically a good portion of Ewell's entire corps was trying to find their way up this hill in the dark. And you can see why that would be a very difficult proposition, as simply making your way up or down this slope in broad daylight is very difficult. So, you know, figuring out who's where and how many people are in front of you would be very difficult. So just another good visual example of how horrible this terrain is for anyone trying to take the summit of this hill. You throw up some logs, some improvised breastworks, some abattis to shoot from behind, and you're going to have a difficult time for anybody taking this position. So this is the summit of Upper Culp's Hill, and you can see over in the distance there the monument to George Greene, good old Pap Greene, considered by many to be equally important, if not more important, than Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain for holding the Union position. He was largely by himself with his brigade up here on the night of July 1st and most of July 2nd, and held off considerably larger numbers of Confederates, although, as pointed out in my other videos, the possibility of the Confederates really taking this position and conquering the terrain below them was not great. Hence, a lot of the Confederate focus on lower Culp's Hill and trying to get around the Union flank of this position, but those efforts were not successful either. There's the 7th Indiana Monument there. I already talked about them and their importance here on the first night of the battle. And then this other monument over here, I believe, maybe to the U.S. artillery. That's what the combat plaque there is for. And I don't know if that's a battery monument or a Army monument, i.e. I don't think it was the battery, members of the battery themselves that would have put it up. But this would imply here that it's an artillery monument. And there's the 66th Ohio Monument down there, passed it earlier, climbing the hill. All right, this is Independent Battery E, Pennsylvania Volunteers, 12th Army Corps, so artillery monument. And then there's trails there that heads back down to Lower Culp's Hill, the trail I was climbing earlier, and past the 60th New York Monument, and then the 66th Ohio is there, and the 7th Indiana over there. I don't believe there are any other regimental markers on the slopes of Culp's Hill, or at least Upper Culp's Hill, but I could be wrong there. There were some other trails going off further down the hill that I did not explore all the way. So, but that is what I found so far. Again, very, very difficult terrain here.